Hello, everyone. The BMM Youth Team is ecstatic to bring you the fourth installment of the My American Journey series, where we interview American Marathi working professionals from a variety of different fields. On today's episode, we have Amit Bapat from New Jersey. He's currently the Associate Director at Wayfair, and his incredible American journey is sure to blow you away. My name is Amol Shirodkar. I'm a sophomore engineering student at Rutgers, and Amit, thank you for taking the time to do this interview.
Happy to be here.
So right off the bat, did you know what career path you wanted to pursue when you were in high school?
No, I don't think I certainly didn't. And I would hazard a guess that anyone who does, it's a good to have a direction in mind. But life throws you a lot of different unexpected changes, so it's smart to kind of be flexible on that.
When you were trying to find a major or a career path to pursue, what role, if any, did your parents play in your decision to choose a particular major or a subject area to concentrate on?
I think it was healthy debate is the way I would frame it. It's certainly involved, certainly perhaps at the time more involved than I would have preferred. But at the same time, I think in hindsight, a healthy discussion. I think so long as those discussions are grounded in listening and understanding each other, they're really constructive. If they're grounded in solutions, this is what I would say in general. Parents and children are mutually interested in each other. And unfortunately, sometimes that translates into being very focused on solutions instead of clearly understanding the problem that's being solved. So in something like career, both sides, instead of saying, well, I want to do this, or I categorically don't want to do that. If you actually take that time collectively to say, well, what is driving this decision? What do I want out of a career? What do I want out of life? What do you want for me out of life as my parents? Once you start there, what will actually happen is you'll find that there's more commonality than discrepancy. And then you can start figuring out why people are landing on the solutions or suggestions that they're landing on. We didn't always do that, but when we did that, I think it was a lot more constructive and frankly, genuinely helpful. People who have been around longer have learned things, and it's useful to get that input so long as it's in a constructive way.
That's a great point, and thank you for that advice too. So when you were in high school, what kinds of extracurriculars did you partake in, and how was it balancing school life and your extracurricular activities?
So thinking back to high school, I made a real hard run at trying to make the Homedale High School tennis team. Never made it, but what that meant was that training for tennis was a big part of what I did, even though I didn't make the cut with tryouts. So, but nevertheless, year round, I was doing some tennis training. And then piano has been with me, again, kind of alluding to your previous question. Piano was something that was kind of put upon me, but I eventually learned to enjoy from a very young age. And so that was something I was very focused on in high school as well. So those were kind of my two sort of formal ones. And then definitely there were a lot of exercises that, the system we have is actually very constructive in that it encouraged folks to volunteer in high school, even if it's initially just to check the box. You learn things in that process. And so certainly I was volunteering in Bayshore Community Hospital and Shrewsbury Library and things like that. So those are kind of my big three. And I think, I would, the one thought, that unsolicited thought there would be focus on a couple and really stick to them. I mean, I stuck to the tennis, even though I didn't make the squad. And I think there's obviously it's overwhelming to see how many choices you have. And also there's inevitably individuals who are extremely successful at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 things all at the same time. And it can be a little bit overwhelming. Focus on you, don't focus on the folks around you. Understand what's interesting to you, what's exciting to you, pick a couple of things and really kind of stick to them for the long haul. I wrote a college essay about not making the tennis team, right? So, you don't know how those things will pan out, but I think if you try to be everything, there's a chance you may, and if you're not capable, there's a chance you may end up not being everything. So, focus is, I think, the key thing. Pick a couple of things and really stick to them throughout the 4 years of high school, and it'll pay dividends. Because it's also, last comment, it's also for your future. I think everybody understandably gets focused on, I got to do these things because I got to round out my portfolio, my credentials, so that I can kind of be in good standing. That's the short game, but there's a reason the system is set up that way. It's set up to actually encourage you to pursue certain passions and things early in your life, so that later on you can come back to them. I mean, now I'm picking up tennis again in this COVID period when a lot of other things have been taken away. I put myself back to that. And if I didn't have that foundation from when I was younger, it would have been something I would have had to start from scratch. So just remember, it's about the long game, not just the short game. And so pick a couple of things and stick to them. That would be my 2 thoughts there.
Thank you for that advice. Okay. It's about the long game, not the short game, right? Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So when you were in high school, how did you plan the high school courses you took? Like I'm talking APs, SAT 2s, and how useful were these qualifications going into college? And did you get any college credit for these AP classes when you were at college?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think I'll focus more on the second half of the question than the first. On the first half of the question, I'll just sort of say the high school game has probably moved on. The college admissions game has probably moved on from when I was in that game. So take the advice of those who are experts in that field, work backwards from what you're trying to achieve from a college admissions standpoint, and then, do the things that need to be done. It's a game. It's a game that everyone's playing. Take the advice from the expert coaches on how to play that game to get the results that you seek. I will say something that is probably more universally true than sort of tactics around class selection for high school, that whatever I used is probably not useful now. Once you get to college, really take a step back and be thoughtful about whether you want to jump into the deep end on advanced placement or taking college credit that you've earned in your high school career. There's a big shift from high school to college. Certainly, unless this has changed, high school, you get a certain set of grades, and those grades are, between 90 to 100, you're an A, between 80 to 90, you're a D, and that's how it goes. College, especially in technical professions, is curved, right? Everything's curved. So in a world where you've gone from absolute grading to relativistic grading. So in a world where you're in relativistic grading, you want to be smart about how you kind of pick the pool in which you're playing, right? You want to be smart about that. So I'm not going to give a one-size-fits-all answer, but I definitely took credits myself, and I think I ended up regretting it in certain cases because I ended up getting into a pool of folks who had actually had a lot more exposure to the material than just an AP class. And so I was swimming against the current a little bit to try and keep up. Whereas folks who kind of revised the material that they had anyway seen in an AP were in a more sort of it was a easier transition for them, particularly freshman year. When freshman year of college is a big transition for the family, big transition for you as an individual. There's a lot of change happening in that time. Anything you can do to take one less complicated thing off the table and make things, if you're revising material you've already seen from a subject matter standpoint, that's just one less thing that's like a new big fresh thing being thrown at you, right? So I'll squeeze in one more on that, which is that, again, don't know if this is true everywhere, but I do remember one big transition being that you kind of, in high school, you had a series of assignments and homework and other things. And then, at best, exams were still a big part, but exams were probably 30, from what I can recall, 30 to 40% of your grade. I mean, that may have changed now. At least the college I went to, and I think it is true of many places, there are 3 exams in a quarter or whatever, and those 3 exams are 85% of your score for the quarter, and it's all relative graded. So, exam performance becomes a big deal, and exams are graded on a curve. You want to think carefully about, where you think it's valuable to you to actually take those credits on board and jump ahead, and where it's actually better to say, you know what, I did this for the qualification to get in. I'm in now. Now there's nothing forcing me to do that. Let me just, make the smart choice. So leave it at that.
This is a perfect transition into talking about your college journey. So what did you major in college, and why did you select this major?
So I joined the College of Engineering. So that choice was made in pre-joining the university. So at Cornell, anyway, you select your college. Again, I presume these are still true things. At Cornell, you select your college at least on the way in. So I was a general engineer for my first year. And then in year 2, it became time to specialize. I'll be honest with you, material science was actually kind of I could tell you a big story and I could spin some yarn about how it was the perfect fit and this and that. I kind of went through every other engineering discipline and I said, well, I don't know how to draw, so I can't be a mechanical engineer. I don't know how to code, so I can't really be a computer and electrical engineer particularly well. I don't like blood and guts and all that kind of stuff, so biological engineering is probably not a place for me. Drawing actually kind of took out civil engineering as well. So it's a little bit more of a process of elimination based approach. But that notwithstanding, I think if anyone's interested, obviously material science is an extremely hot field. It has been, it's become hot. When I joined it 10, 15 years ago, it was still like very much metallurgy oriented, but now that's all changed. Of course, silicon was part of it back then too. But what I would say is if you like science in general, but there's not a specific one of, if you go into high school, biology, chemistry, physics, if you kind of like all those subjects, but there's not one of those three subjects that's really appealing to you as kind of the thing that's drawing you, material science isn't a bad place to go, because, you know, you're in a class in the morning where you're talking about biology, you're in a class in the afternoon where you're talking about chemistry, and you're in a class in the evening. Materials are at the core of everything, right? In that sense, and you don't really have to specialize until you're going on for your master's and PhD and all that stuff if you choose to go that route. So if you like science, just as a general thing, science is interesting to you, fundamental science is interesting, but you just don't know which one to go down, material science isn't a bad choice.
So when you were in college, what clubs or groups did you partake in?
So I didn't put a ton of structure into that thinking, and one thing led to another. A set of social interactions led to me joining the Cornell Bhangra team, and that was easily, I don't know, 12 hours a week or so of stuff. So that was plenty, and that's pretty much. I mean, I did some other things on the side, Hindu Student Council and whatnot, but that was the main one for me.
Awesome, awesome. So what's your favorite college memory, if you would like to share?
The caveat there is important. If you'd like to share, there are a lot. You know, I mean, I think I'll generalize it versus going after something super specific. I think the best thing about college, in a nutshell, is it's actually in your life's journey. It's the point with maximum. You know, generally responsibility and freedom go together. You have, the more freedom you have, the more responsibility you have. When you're a kid, you have less freedom. Your parents are in charge of the world, but you also don't have that much responsibility. Do your homework, that's it. Parents will take care of everything else. When you're a full-fledged adult, I think there's a phrase now called adulting. I've heard a few times, which I'm doing with the 2-year-old. I'm very much there now. I can do whatever I want when I wake up in the morning, but I've got family to take care of, finances to take care of. In college, you're kind of in the middle, right? You have plenty of freedom. You're kind of out there on your own, but the bills are getting paid, or you're working to pay the bills. But either way, you know, you got some support behind you, right? You kind of, it's kind of, you're at your leisure. So I think the key with that is to really be intentional about it. And if you do that, you'll have a great time, right? I think in my freshman year, I wasn't super intentional about it. I just kind of went with the flow, and went wherever I wanted to, or wherever the winds took me. And you know, the results were predictable. You know, had some tough times academically, had some tough times in terms of balancing everything and juggling everything, right? And then beyond that, it was perfect because I got to decide what I wanted, and I was able to do what I wanted. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it wasn't stressful. Of course it was stressful, but it was just a blast. It was sort of the best time ever, balancing both things, right? Work and play. And then the last thing I'll say, just because I think it's useful on this topic about memories and fun in college. The graduate student, my second day in school, in college, gave me a really strong piece of advice that I only came to value later on. In college, you can get good grades. Whatever you're doing, you can get good grades. There are 3 things you can do. You can get good grades, you can have an awesome social time, make the best friends ever, but friends for life, do all that, and you can sleep. In any given week, you can only get 2 out of those 3 things. So each week on Sunday night, make sure you make your decision this week. What are the 2 I'm going after, and what's the one I'm not? And if you do that every week, then you know how to balance things out, and you can say, okay, I'm actually, like, my health is, I've been redlining my body a little bit too much. I need to just kind of focus on my school and my sleep this week, or my friends and my sleep. I don't have exams this week, whatever it is, right? And frankly, that if you do that really well by junior year or senior year, I was planning class selection around that. I was planning exam calendars around that kind of thinking, right? To say, okay, I want to make sure I pick classes where exams don't clash against each other and things like that. So hopefully that helps.
That's great advice. And as a current college student, I'll definitely keep that in mind. So did you go for a postgraduate qualification?
Oh yeah, later on. So after material science, I ended up doing some investment banking for a couple of years, and then chose to go back and get an MBA. So that I was at University of Chicago, Booth School of Business for a couple of years from 2011 to 2013. Yep.
Okay, so on that note, I know you mentioned investment banking. Could you tell us a little bit about a little summary about your career path?
Yeah, I can do that. So we kind of covered high school into college, material science, got that degree. Come around sort of junior year, it was material science is a research heavy field. I mean, even today. And even if you're going into industry, Shekhar Uncle could probably comment on this, but an MS, a master's or PhD in the field is pretty important to have. So I kind of had to make a choice on whether I was really going to kind of commit to the 6 years of staying focused on material science, or if I was going to make a pivot. And I didn't find myself particularly effective in research. Research wasn't something that I had the patience for. I kind of tore around the lab, broke things in the lab, didn't have the best, best research record. So I sort of said, okay, this probably isn't my long-term home in that case. And so then I kind of honestly just started exploring. One thing led, series of unplanned circumstances led to the opportunity at Citibank to do some investment banking work for them. I went off and did that for a while, learned a lot in the process, particularly starting in 2008. So, I think my second month or third month in full-fledged career was when Lehman Brothers happened, if anyone can remember that. I'm not sure I'm old if you remember that, but back in 2008, learned what I had to learn there, decided that it was useful, but I was learning the same thing over and over. You just learn how to do mergers again and again and again. So I wanted to go back to business school to actually kind of get a bit of grounding in business in general. Did that. Similarly, kind of traditional approach, said I still don't know what I want to do specifically, so let me go to a place that gives me options, and consulting did that for me. So I went to McKinsey for 3 years to do some consulting work there. And then after that, I kind of found a feel. And for me, ecom, it was kind of luck of the draw. I got a few ecom projects, and ecom was something that I wanted to go spend some time in. So from there, I started taking a bunch of operating jobs. I was at Hulu in Los Angeles for some time, and then at a small company called TrueCar, then at a big ecom company called Wayfair that sells furniture for the last 3 years out in Boston. And then ever since the pandemic hit, trying to keep remote working and all that going, actually jumped back into the small company game. I'm at a 100-person startup right now, or not really startup, but 100-person small company called Wink.com. They're a wine subscription online. But I'm kind of a generalist in the ecom space. That's kind of what I do.
I know you mentioned you pivoted your profession multiple times in your career path. So what inspired these pivots, and how was it making this transition?
It's a really deep question. I guess I'll answer in maybe two parts. I think the first thing that now in hindsight, I can look back and realize is that careers are long, jobs are short. So it's important not to get too caught up in your own planning about your career. You need to do, I think that the phrase that I would put out there is like, you have to know that there's a plan for you that's outside of your control, but you have to act as if there is no plan for you. So at every moment, you have to kind of have a game plan, but you also have to have a bit of, and I wish I had this earlier in my career, a bit of, I'm going to call it humility, just awareness that like, this isn't really in my hands. Like I need to have a plan and act according to a plan, but this isn't really in my hands. So if something doesn't go my way, or if something doesn't go the way I expect it to go, that's all right. I accept all of it. Now what's the next step, right? What's the next thing we do? I think we get very focused on what we believe our plan is for ourselves, and then we get stuck. So leaving that kind of bigger picture thought out of the way, I think the biggest thing on the pivot for me, I kind of mentioned it in the engineering world, the particular profession, I think computer engineers, electrical engineers, there's a pretty big and direct transition into the marketplace straight away out of a bachelor's degree. In material science, that's from what I observed at the time anyway, it was less the case. I think understandably there was a push to go for a master's PhD, and that was a lot of school, and I was sort of itching to get out there and start earning and not put in the next 6 years in school. And research was hard for me to really get excited about. So that was why I started looking around. And then as far as investment banking, it kind of came along the way. That time, I don't know if it's still a hot trend, but at that time there was a bit of a trend of everybody on Wall Street looking for sharp, sort of focusing less on what discipline you came up in and actually just kind of interviewing across the colleges. So all the Wall Street banks were in interviewing on the engineering campus, and it seemed interesting. So kind of went for it. And also it was one of the few professions that was offering training. So like the first 8 weeks, we were in a very intensive sort of training camp type thing for the discipline. So that was attractive to me. I was kind of like on someone else's dime, I can learn a set of skills. So that seemed interesting. So I did that. And then business school was kind of a natural path. I felt I always needed to go back, mostly because I didn't have the background in my undergraduate, right? So I felt I needed to kind of go get that grounding. As I found out once I went there, that's kind of the minority. Most folks often have already had a business background or a business grounding, and then they go back just to kind of get a career switch or something like that. But for me, it was genuinely to learn about it because I didn't have any actual education in the matter. Consulting was frankly just a preserve your options type call. I didn't really know I didn't want to get into one field or another without really understanding more, or one discipline or another. So I just wanted to preserve my options. And then finally, I kind of realized that I need to put my hands on the controls. Like I can do the thinking job in the professional services type. Oh, what's the best way to run your business? Which is what a lot of the consulting work is. Admittedly, painting with a broad brush. So then I was just looking for kind of a home, and having done a few e-commerce projects in consulting, that's kind of where I landed. But yeah, if you asked me when I was in high school, hey, do you think you're going to be working at Wayfairs and whatever, selling furniture for a living? I think my parents would have been. You talked about parents' involvement. If I told my parents in high school, hey, I want to go sell furniture for a living at Wayfair, I think they would have been a little bit scared by that concept, and so would have I. So the point is to bring it home that like your path is not really in your hands, and I think it's important to kind of, whatever you're doing, even if you're going after a very clear track, go after the track with 100% focus as if it's in your hands, but then whatever comes out of it, kind of be comfortable with it, and just say, okay, that happened. What do I do next?
I know you have experience working for both big companies and small companies. So what would you say your favorite memory is working in corporate life?
I think what I can say more than favorite memory is probably how to think about that choice. And actually, the more you have this, I kind of had to learn it by doing. But if you have this concept in your mind ahead of time, you can actually make smarter choices about where you want to go at different points in your career, right? So like, there's basically a very simple framework for this, right? A big company, well recognized, gives you credentialing for the rest of for your future career from that point, gives you a lot of good training, right? Gives you a lot of good structure and training, gives you a lot of scope for meeting new people, networking, all of that kind of stuff, right? Small company, but on the other hand, you're going to get a very small slice of a problem. You're going to get a very small slice of a problem. You're going to get a very focused piece of work. Getting things done is going to be more complex. Getting things done is going to be kind of more, let's call it bureaucratic or whatever, right? You're also not nearly as scarce of a resource, right? So because you're not as scarce of a resource in a big company, you have less room for error, less room for making errors, right? It's something where if you take a gamble on a decision, or you take a gamble on something and it doesn't work out, well, there's a line of people out the door trying to get in, right? So now you can flip all that on its head for a small company. There's not going to be any structure. There's not going to be any training. There's not going to be any real rigidity to what you're doing. You're not really, like, if I told someone I was at Wink.com or TrueCar, those companies don't mean anything to anybody, right? So as far as, getting onto your next stop in your career, they may or may not be that helpful, right? On the flip side, you're going to get a big problem where you're basically going to get like, go figure this out and like run the business, right? You're going to get a much bigger piece of the problem. You're going to be able to make change much faster, whatever it is you're trying to execute on, or drive impact much faster, because you're going to have a much bigger piece of the puzzle. And you're also, for want of a better term, there's fundamentally going to be less, you guys can cut this out if you don't want this to be, there's going to be less nonsense at the small company, simply because it's small. There's no time for nonsense, right? If there is nonsense, you can call out the nonsense and say, hey, listen, you guys are having an argument about something that's not connected to how we make money. Stop it. We need to focus on this. Here's the evidence that this is the part of the problem we need to focus on, right? If you're that direct in a big company, oh, well, who's sort of, what's the situation, who's friends with who, all of that stuff starts to come into it in a big company for good reason. I mean, it's just the nature of it, right? So I think if you understand that framework, I kind of learned that by bouncing around, and I kind of learned that the hard way. But if you knew that going into it, I think you could be much more in tune with what you prefer, what you value, and what you value changes at different points in your career. Like, I think for me personally, the way it's now worked out, I got tremendous value out of the training, the branding of those big companies that I was at originally, the Citibanks, the McKinseys, the, you know, whoever you call it. Both genuine skills training, but also the recognition that offers when you're trying to walk into another door, people know what that is. But now I'm at a stage in career where I'm looking for different things. I have a family. I kind of want to get on with it. And I also have a higher risk tolerance now than I did before, right? Because I've built a bit of capital and you know, did some work building a bit of a base, right? So now I'm kind of quite keen to go to this small 100-person company, and I probably will stay in this environment by choice for a few years, right? So those I think are the big differences. And I think, you know, being thoughtful about what you want at any given point in time. There are folks, I mean, because the alternative side of this is also true. If you really think about it, when you have no family, when you have no obligations, that in some ways is the biggest time to take a risk, right? You know, you have the least, it's by definition less risky then than it is later on. So at that point, like if you want to go really small and you know that, hey, I'm going to go really small, but I'm not going to get the training and other things. So I'm either going to supplement with some training on skills from somewhere else, or I'm going to do this for a fixed period of time. And if we hit it big, we hit it big. And if we don't, then on this time scale, I'm going to move on because I need to get some training. There are many different paths through this maze. I think the key thing is if you understand those distinctions between a big company and a small company, and you can be much more thoughtful about the path you create for yourself versus kind of what I did, which is stumbling through it and then coming out of it later and saying, I see now there are these differences, what have you. So hopefully that's helpful for folks.
As someone who's never worked for a corporation, I didn't know how much of a role politics played in all of this. So thank you for that insight. But
well,
I know
it's everywhere. I mean, don't let's not pretend for a minute it's not. Politics is a human thing. Humans are you know, they behave in a certain way. So I think anybody who says, I don't like the culture of this place, well, always make it a relative comparison. You know, I think don't think of it in the absolute. There is no organization of humans beyond the size of 10 that doesn't have those dynamics. I'm talking in relative terms. It's going to be a little bit less at a small place, and you're going to be able to kind of focus on the facts at a small pace a little bit easier than you are in a big place where it's just bigger by definition. So the message shouldn't be that, I don't want there to be politics, because there will be, accept it. The message is, well, okay, am I willing to trade that off early in my career for training and branding and all of these things? And especially when I'm going to be more junior and I'll have people playing that game for me, and I can get the benefits of the training and the branding and all the other things. And then as I move on in career, you know, how much am I into that? How much am I interested in playing that game and all of that? So anyway, I hope that helps.
Thank you for that insight. That was really interesting. So I know you worked in multiple fields. So if you had to pick one, what particular traits or technical skills would be relevant to that field or useful to have to obtain jobs in that field?
Yeah, so you hear a lot these days about the word problem solving as a skill. You may have heard that, problem solving, you need to be a good problem solver. It is indeed, I would argue, an overused term, but it is also like true, right? That if you want to go down the generalist path, right, which is kind of the path that I'm on, that's the most critical thing. Can you tease apart not just math problems, we need to get from X to Y, but more ambiguous problems like what should our brand be? That's still a problem that you can put structure to, and you can actually break into specific choices, and it's not kind of this ephemeral what should our brand be, right? And building skills to be able to do that really well is probably the most, I would go out there and say, if you can combine that with the ability to actually get it done, the soft skills to actually be able to kind of influence people, convince people, bring coalitions together, that combination is very rare in the marketplace. Generally, you have people who are extremely good problem solvers, but have no real concept on how to execute the thing and get the outcome. Or you have folks who can take a plan and execute it, but have a tough time being able to tease apart the problem to figure out what the plan should be in the first place, right? That's why the consulting industry exists, right? It's like you have people running a business, and then you have people advising folks on how to run the business, because it's like, it's hard to do both at the same time, right? So I think if you think of technical disciplines as crash courses in problem solving, that would be kind of the if I were to, you should do what you're passionate about. But if you're asking generally, hey, listen, what is a skill that's extremely valuable or a trait that's extremely valuable? Technical disciplines disproportionately teach you that skill, right? Because I would even go as technical disciplines makes it a bit tactical. I'll step back and say systems thinking is what's needed. So not something where it's like I'm feeding you a set of facts and I'm testing you on whether you're able to actually reproduce those facts on command, but the disciplines that say, hey, I'm giving you a way of thinking about a problem. I'm giving you a system of rules of the road, rules of physics, or whether it's computer engineering or whether it's, you know, science-based disciplines where it's like, hey, this is the way the science works. Now on the test paper, I'm not going to ask you to rewrite for me all the formulae. You can bring in the formula sheet if you want, but I'm going to give you some problem. And now the real test is whether you can apply those things correctly, deduce cleanly what needs to happen, right? That to me, I think, is the value of that stuff. So you know, I think there's this thing about, oh, be an engineer because it's like whatever, good and whatever. I think if you value problem solving, if you want to be a generalist, that's the real skill set that it brings to the table. And I think the other thing that it brings to the table is everyone at one point in their life should have an experience where they pull up an exam after not because you didn't study, but you studied really hard, you've put in all the effort, and you get the exam paper. The exam paper is 3 questions. You don't know how to start any of the 3 questions. That experience needs to happen early in low-cost learning environments, because that is the corporate world always. Someone is giving you a problem because they're asking you to solve it because they don't know how. If it was obvious, someone would have done it already, right? And so being able to face that and confront that and say, okay, well, I have 3 hours to sit here. What am I going to do? I have to start somewhere. Okay, what do I know? How do I start figuring this out? That's problem solving. That's the skill. So, you know, that would be my 2 cents on what I think is most valuable. Being curious, learning a systems thinking type approach in whatever field that is, carries a ton of value right now.
When you mentioned that exam with 3 questions that you don't know how to solve any of them, I can definitely relate to that, unfortunately, or maybe for the better.
What I'm telling you is that that's fortunate. That's what I'm telling you. It feels unfortunate, and it feels like, well, I studied everything and I don't know how to attack this problem. But that's I'll go a step further. That's life, actually. That's you know, every day of raising a kid is that. Because I've never, especially your first kid, I have no idea how my daughter is going to behave today, and I've never dealt with it before. And now I have to think, okay, what do I know that I can use in this situation? What is likely true about the drivers of her behavior? What is likely true of the drivers of my behavior? Like you conquer the fear, and it's better to conquer the fear of not knowing what to do in college on silly little exams that you'll forget about 10 years from now, than going through something that you just breeze through. It's super comfortable, you know how to do it, and then you come face that challenge in life. So don't feel, I don't think that'll work with your parents, but you can try to tell them that, hey, listen, like, I tried, it's teaching me something about life. You can at least tell them that it's true. It'll help later.
So I know you spoke highly of the material science engineering major. So if you were starting over, would you select the same major?
I think you have to qualify that question with what I'm starting over with the knowledge of. If I'm starting over with the knowledge of where I am today, I would definitely do the same thing, because it's been extremely valuable for all the things that I've done. But it's a bit of a catch-22, right? Like, I'm only doing the things that I've done now because that built a base that allowed me to do these things, right? So I think, you know, it's easy for me to say, yes, absolutely, I would do the same thing, because it was one of the, per the just most recent answer, one of the bedrock systems thinking disciplines that got me the basics of how to problem solve well, which is sort of my key skill that I rely on every day right now in my office job. But I think what I would also say is I've reached a point where at some point career is not going to be everything to you. And I think it's something that's important to think about, as crazy as it sounds, even in high school. And with all the focus on, I got to get into college, and with all the focus in college, I got to get to that job, with all the focus. If you go down the road about 25 years, 30 years, and this kind of gets to this first generation, second generation dynamic, like for the most part, and this is not, I have to generalize, I have no choice. For the most part, we grew up loosely, I would say comfortably, all of us, right? Many of our parents did not. And so for them, there was an obvious economic driver of, well, I got to go drive on the economics because I got to get to a place where everything's healthy and stable. If you grew up comfortably and you do these things generally okay, you're going to get to a place at 30, 35 where all those things are going to be comfortable again for you and whatever your family situation is at that time. And you're going to ask yourself the question, what do I do with the rest of my life? Right? And it's important that you kind of take that even in your career thinking and major decisioning early of like, but in two ways. One, is there something that I'm really passionate about now? If there is, go for it. If there's something that is clicking for you, absolutely go for it and don't look back and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, right? And even if it's hard or even if it works against sort of the conventional wisdom or whatever it is, if you know in your heart that that's what you want to be doing for the rest of your life, take the leap. That's very rare, and it's like a very big blessing to have that conviction that early in life. If you don't stress about it too much. So don't worry so much about what do I need to become. Life will take you in the direction it takes you. Make a smart choice. Make a choice that suits sort of what you think your strengths are, right? Make a choice for something that you certainly are happy to wake up and go do. If you hate blood and guts like I do, don't try to become a doctor, right? Like, make some smart calculations like that. But otherwise, relax, I think, is the big piece of advice. Like, it's going to be fine no matter what you do. And I think that there's a lot of energy spent on trying to optimize in the micro versus kind of taking a step back and thinking about where you're going to be 30 years from now.
So on that note, do you think a glass ceiling existed for the first generation? And if yes, do you think it exists for your generation?
Again, I'll try to define that question in maybe 2 or 3 subcategories. I think fundamentally, the resourcing of the first generation is fundamentally different than the resourcing of this generation, right? So by default, there were some limitations on the first generation that aren't there on this generation. Or are less so, maybe I should say, so not generalized, because I'm sure it's not uniform like that. But generally in the macro lens, there's probably less economic limitation on and resource limitation on what we can explore. Similarly, I think there was a connectedness with our connectivity limitation on the first generation that's not there on this generation, right? In terms of the internet and all of the things that powers and all of the access to information that creates and everything like that. And then I think culturally, the third thing that I would say is there's actually, I'm not going to call it a limitation, but there's a different problem that this generation has of identity that the first generation did not have. The first generation came with an identity. There was an identity, and then they came to a new place and they sought to establish that same identity in some fashion in the new place while absorbing some things of the new place. Growing up, now you in this generation have the opposite problem. I have 4 or 5 identities being foisted upon me at any given point in time culturally, and I have to figure out what combination or alchemy of those things I need to be, both at the office and my personal life and my family life, right? That's its own challenge that's unique to this generation. So on the first two, I think on the economic one, the point is use it wisely, right? There's an economic dividend that the first generation worked really hard to hand to us. So be very thoughtful about that. Ask yourself the question, is my goal to just double that, triple that? What will I do if I double that, triple that? Or is my goal to actually make use of that economic dividend, get to some place of stable, and then put that economic dividend back into a certain form of support for the world, for anything that's important to you, right? I'm not going to be sort of specific on that. On the information dividend, I think I would say, or barrier, I would say, remember, that's as much of a risk as it is a benefit, right? You can choose now to close yourself off to diverse opinions and put yourself in a bubble of all common opinions and live in that forever, in a way that you were forced into the world before. You had to go to the grocery store and see other people. If you want to, now you can go to the grocery store and just see. All I have to do is go to Edison. If I wanted, I could live my whole life in Edison and not see a non-Indian person if I wanted to, right? So that's not right? You should force yourself to kind of get that other perspective and don't let the connectivity of everything kind of box you in. And then on the third one, I think the biggest thing I can say on the third one is don't run from the Indian culture stuff without having really independently tried to study it, whatever that means for you, right? I think there's, going to that problem, you get 4 or 5 cultures, you have a very sort of, I'm not going to generalize in terms of it. There's whatever your parents are imbuing in you early days, then there's the environment you see outside of you, then there's the environment you see in college, which opens your eyes even more, and on it goes. In all of that, inevitably the least understood one is the one actually that you're growing up with, and it's the one you're most programmed to reject or programmed to put distance between, because it's a human condition, right? Every teenager wants to do the things they're not being instructed to do. That is a human thing, right? I think that the downside of that is that there's actually a lot of material out there that, in connecting it back to information connectivity, there's a lot of information that's at everyone's fingertips now to really engage with Indian culture, however you choose to define that. And everyone will define it differently on your own terms. So once you kind of make it through college and you make it through everything and you come out the other side, whatever your relationship is with that identity, with that Indian, Maharashtrian, pick whatever identity, re-engage with it on your own terms, not necessarily in conjunction with your family or the existing institutions that you grew up in, but go make a conscious effort to try to learn about it. And then if you still don't connect with it, it's fine, right? But you know that you don't connect with it, or that you take the piece of it that's genuinely part of your identity, and you don't kind of just automatically put it to the side and say, well, by default, I'm going to put it to the side because I don't understand. So that was a long answer to a simple question, but hopefully helpful.
Thank you. As a man with a family and someone who's worked multiple jobs, what's some advice you can give for managing work-life balance?
Another one that we probably, I don't know if I had the answer to that, things would be a little different. But I guess I have 3 practical, I could talk in long sentences, but maybe just 3 practical pieces of advice would be helpful to close this out. One, make a financial plan. I think folks that go through the business disciplines do that. Like we have one, but I don't know that I would have had one if I hadn't gone down this investment banking route and MBA and whatever, right? Everyone should have a financial plan, and that financial plan should start with something along the lines of, hey, listen, this is the amount of money I can retire on. Work backwards from there, right? And that number is not going to be perfect, and it's always going to be changing, but it creates this distance between you and money, because now money is just a tool, and it's like money is an instrument, and I know how much of that instrument that I need to do the things that I want to do over the next 10 to 15 years, right? And it puts everything in a nice big perspective. Otherwise, it gives you, this is a key thing, it gives you an absolute concept of money, not a relative concept of money. I think if you have a relative, in the default is to have a relative, am I paid, a lot of questions like, am I getting paid what it's worth it? Am I getting paid my value? Am I getting in my job? Am I getting paid what someone else is getting paid more than what I'm getting paid? Or am I making the right career choices to maximize economic outcomes, whatever, right? All of that stuff. It creates a lot of unnecessary headache unless you sit down and create an absolute financial plan for yourself and say, this is my box. I don't really care about what's happening outside, right? That will help because it will stop you staying on the hamster wheel longer than you need to stay on the hamster wheel. The second thing that's sort of, I would argue, just tangible, not just kind of philosophical thing. Decide how you want to, and I only did this recently, so I'm still learning from this myself, but decide how you want to value each day of your life. So for me right now, that's as of literally 6 months ago of working on this practice, it's doing a certain amount of meditation, making sure I support my office, making sure I support my family, and making sure I take care of, to some degree, my body, whether that's exercise or whatever it is, right? And track it. It doesn't mean that every day you're going to succeed at it, but I think one thing that I got told, frankly, someone told me this and it really stuck, is we're all chasing work-life balance, but we're not measuring ourselves. So if you're not measuring yourself on it every day or every week or every month, then you really don't know. You're just kind of going on a gut feel of, well, I'm feeling out of balance right now, or I'm feeling, and then inevitably you're just going to feel too much balanced on the work side, right? If you measure it, then you can actually make changes around it and say, okay, these last few months, I've really been going off the deep end at the office. I have to find a way to cut back on that or whatever it is, right? And then the third thing that I would say is, by default, you're going to have to be okay with the word balance between work and life implies that people at work are going to be dissatisfied with you. And you have to get okay with that. And that's something that is a change from the hamster wheel we're on. Kick butt in high school, crush everything, do everything, work really hard, do all those things so that you can get into whatever great place you want to get into. Okay, you go to that great place, kick butt at that great place. You know, harder you work, luckier you get. Kill your body, work hard, play hard, all that, right? Get a job, then you're in career. That thing just keeps going. That doesn't end, right? And so if you don't quickly start to absorb the concept of like, I'm going to have to say no to people, and everyone says that, oh, say no to people, but there's a consequence to saying no. You're going to be a little bit delayed on some positive outcome you want at the office. You're going to, have a tough time managing expectations, whatever it is. People aren't going to be thrilled about that, right? At some point in your journey. So the more you're absorbing that thought early to say, my job is not, simply because someone is not happy with the amount I'm committing to the office, that doesn't mean that I'm lazy. Those two things are different. Am I being lazy, or am I putting my time into other productive activities that I need to keep my balance together? Then they may feel that I'm not working as hard as they want me to work, but I have my tracker, I have my documentation. I'm not just watching Netflix all day. I did some other constructive things that I wanted to do, right? And so that's why the measurement, going back to the measurement, is so critical, because without that independent reference point, your only reference points are your boss and your family. And there's no one else to tell you whether you actually achieve balance or not. And so you'll always feel out of balance. So again, to summarize, make a financial plan. That's the first thing I can say. A long-range financial plan. It'll be wrong. They're always wrong. That's the nature of long-range financial plans. But having one forces you to create some distance between yourself and money. The second is, make sure that you decide what you value in your life, part of work life, and write it down and measure it as far as whether you're achieving it every day or not. And it's okay to miss, like missing is part of it, but you know that you're missing now and you know what you can change. And then the third thing is, understand that in order to hit those things that you want to hit, you're going to have to say no to people, which means not just say no to people. People aren't going to like that you're saying no to them. And you're going to have to work on how to manage that and be okay with that at the office. That's kind of the three practical things I would share. And I still haven't figured it out. I would end on that also.
To end off, Amit, thank you so much for all the amazing insight. I know your advice definitely resonated with me, and I'm sure many of the viewers as well. But if you can go back in time and tell your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Thinking is a big one. Yeah, I think it has to be, ask yourself, really engage with the question, why are you here in this world? And that doesn't mean have an answer, because of course there's no answer initially, but don't let others tell you what that is, because the default is, without individually going wherever you go, wherever any individual goes for their own personal piece, to really engage with that question, the world fills in the blank. So if you don't ask yourself the question, why am I here? What is it that I'm here to do on this world? The world will fill in the blank. I'm here to go to college. I'm here to get an amazing job. I'm here to earn a lot of money. I'm here to have a fancy car. I'm here to have it. The world will fill in that blank for you. Doesn't mean that you have to have the answer. And I think as a young kid, I felt like, well, I don't have the answer, so then the world's answers must be right? But if you just say, it's okay for me not to know right now, this is the world that's filling in my blank, and I'm gonna go along with it for now because I don't know yet. Even that awareness is extremely valuable, and would have been extremely valuable to me as a youngster. I would have taken a lot less stress. I would have taken a lot less anxiety. I would have said, okay, I don't know, so I have to go along with what the world is filling in for me, but it's the world that's filling in this blank question for this question for me right now. So if I don't get it, it's okay. That's not what I was put here to do. I don't think that's what I was here to do. The world filled in that blank. If it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, no big deal. Let's figure it out. We continue to engage with this question. So go to your meditation Zen space and ask yourself the question, why am I here on this earth? And if you don't get an answer, just say, okay, I don't have the answer today. The world's filling in the blank for me. It's all right. I'll operate on the world's plan for right now, but it's the world's plan. It's not my plan.
Wow. Amit, Bapat, everyone. Thank you so much.